I apologize. The video number 3 ran out mid-sentence there, so I'm just gonna kind of restart at the beginning of that sentence here with video number 4. Some words of this conversation must have reached Wilson swaying in the office door, for suddenly a new theme found voice among his gasping cries. "You don't have to tell me what kind of car it was. I know what kind of car it was." Watching Tom, I saw the wad of muscle back of his shoulder tighten under his coat. He walked quickly over to Wilson, and standing in front of him seized him firmly by the upper arms. "You've got to pull yourself together," he said with soothing gruffness. Wilson's eyes fell upon Tom. He started up on his tiptoes, and then would have collapsed to his knees had not Tom held him upright. "Listen," said Tom, shaking him a little. "I just got here a minute ago, from New York. I was bringing you that coupe we've been talking about. That yellow car I was driving this afternoon wasn't mine, do you hear? I haven't seen it all afternoon. Only the Negro and I were near enough to hear what he said, but the policeman caught something in the tone and looked over with truculent eyes. What's all this about?" he demanded. "I'm a friend of his." Tom turned his head, but kept his hands firm on Wilson's body. "He says he knows the car that did it. It was a yellow car." Some dim impulse moved the policeman to look suspiciously at Tom. "And what color's your car?" "It's a blue car, a coupe." "We've come straight from New York," I said. Someone who had been driving a little behind us confirmed this, and the policeman turned away. "Now if you'll let me have that name again, correct?" Picking up Wilson like a doll, Tom carried him into the office, set him down in a chair, and came back. "If somebody'll come here and sit with him," he snapped authoritatively. He watched while the two men standing closest glanced at each other and went unwillingly into the room. Tom shut the door on them and came down the single step, his eyes avoiding the table. As he passed close to me, he whispered, "Let's get out." Self-consciously, with his authoritative arms breaking the way, we pushed through the still-gathering crowd, passing a hurried doctor, case in hand, who had been sent in for Wild Hope half an hour ago. Tom drove slowly until we were beyond the bend. Then his foot came down hard, and the coupe raced along through the night. In a little while I heard a low, husky sob and saw the tears were overflowing down his face. "That goddamn coward," he whimpered. "He didn't even stop his car." The Buchanan's house floated suddenly toward us through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stopped beside the porch and looked up at the second floor where the windows bloomed with light among the vines. "Daisy's home," he said. As we got out of the car, he glanced at me and frowned slightly. I ought to have you dropped off. I ought to have dropped you off in West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we can do tonight." A change had come over him, and he spoke gravely, with decision. As we walked across the moonlight gravel to the porch, he disposed of the situation in a few brisk phrases. "I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home, and while you're waiting, you and Jordan better go in the kitchen and have them get you some supper, if you want any." He opened the door. "Come in." "No thanks, but I'd be glad if you'd order me the taxi. I'll wait outside." Jordan put her hand on my arm. "Won't you come in, Nick?" "No, thanks." I was feeling a little sick, and I wanted to be alone, but Jordan lingered for a moment more. "It's only 9:30, she said. "I'd be damned if I didn't go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan, too." She must have seen something of this in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps into the house. I sat down for a few minutes with my head in my hands, until I heard the phone taken up inside and the butlers calling a taxi. Then I walked slowly down the driveway from the house, intending to wait by the gate. I hadn't gone 20 yards when I heard my name, and Gatsby stepped from behind 2 bushes in the path. I must have felt pretty weird by that time, because I could think of nothing except the luminosity of his pink suit under the moon. "What are you doing?" I inquired. "Just standing here, old sport." Somehow, that seemed a despicable occupation. For all I knew, he was going to rob the house in a moment. I wouldn't have been surprised to see sinister faces, the faces of Wolfsheim's people, behind him in the dark shrubbery. "Did you see any trouble on the road?" he asked after a minute. "Yes." He hesitated. "Was she killed?" "Yes." "I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should all come at once. She stood it pretty well." He spoke as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered. "I got to West Egg by a side road," he went on, "and left the car in my garage. I don't think anybody saw us, but of course I can't be sure." I disliked him so much by this time that I didn't find it necessary to tell him that he was wrong. "Who was the woman?" he inquired. "Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage." "How the devil did it happen?" "Well, I tried to swing the wheel—" He broke off, and suddenly I was guessing the truth. "Was Daisy driving?" "Yes," he said after a moment. "But of course I'll say I was." You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous and she thought it would steady her to drive, and this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, thought we were somebody she knew. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman toward the other car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly. It ripped her open. Don't tell me, old sport. He winced. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she couldn't, so I pulled on the emergency brake. Then she fell over into my lap and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow, he said presently. I'm just going to wait here and see if he tries to bother her about that unpleasantness this afternoon. She's locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again. He won't touch her, I said. He's not thinking about her. I don't trust him, old sport. How long are you going to wait? All night if necessary. Anyhow, till they all go to bed. A new point of view occurred to me. Suppose Tom found out that Daisy had been driving. He might think she saw a connection in it. He might think anyway. I looked at the house. There were 2 or 3 bright windows downstairs, and the pink glow from Daisy's room on the second floor. You wait here, I said. I'll see if there's any sign to the commotion. So before I continue, there's a couple things I want to point out about this conversation between Nick Carraway and Gatsby. The first is that Carraway said he's not thinking about her. We know, of course, as readers, that he's thinking about Myrtle Wilson because he's losing his mistress. She passed away, and he can tell that he's on the verge of losing his wife as well. But he is going to be a little bit concerned maybe when Nick says, where does he say it here? He might think he saw a connection in it. He might think it anyway. So maybe Nick's concern is that Tom will think that Daisy was driving, has known all along about Myrtle, and intentionally hit her, which would then cause a whole new layer to this drama. And so that's something we'll have to look out for. I'm going to continue here with I walked. I walked back along the border of the lawn, traversed the gravel softly, and tiptoed up the veranda steps. The drawing-room curtains were open, and I saw that the room was empty. Crossing the porch where we had dined that June night 3 months before, I came to a small rectangle of light, which I guessed was the pantry window. The blind was drawn, but I found a rift at the sill. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness, his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. Once in a while, she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy. Neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi feeling its way along the dark road toward the house. Gatsby was waiting where I had left him in the driveway. "Is it all quiet up there?" he asked anxiously. "Yes, it's all quiet." I hesitated. "You'd better come home and get some sleep." He shook his head. "I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport." He put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. So as you watch a little bit of the scene here, I just can't help but as Gatsby is here hiding, hoping, watching as Tom might or might not, his concern is domestic abuse toward Daisy, as he kind of found out that they've kind of been seeing each other and they have plans to run away, and that Daisy doesn't love him, and now there might be some connection between Daisy and Myrtle, and she might have hit Myrtle on purpose, and Daisy not really committing to Tom, or not really committing to Gatsby, but shying away from Tom, but then not admitting that she never loved Tom. And now here's Gatsby hiding in the trees as he watches. I just can't imagine that this is how Gatsby saw it. This is not the way that Gatsby wanted this to go. This is not his dream. This is not what it was all for. But he's held her on such a pedestal and devoted his entire life to this, that this is what he feels he has to do in order to try to get what he wants, even though, we're starting to compromise morals, we're starting to compromise personality and who they are. And it's all for someone who will never be as perfect as he expects her to be in the pedestal that he puts her on, partially because she's human and people make mistakes. And so this is kind of another crack in the sidewalk, so to speak, of this whole plan falling apart right around Gatsby.